The acid rain beat a hollow rhythm against the curved hull fragment that served as Myra's roof. The young Calasian girl curled tighter beneath the thin thermal sheet. Its once vibrant blue now faded to the same dusty gray as everything else in the Tarsus wasteland. Her six-fingered hand clutched a small mechanical puzzle box, the only toy she possessed, fashioned by her mother from discarded ship components. "Try to sleep, little one," Elia whispered, her iridescent eyes glowing softly in the darkness of their makeshift shelter. Like all Calasians, her skin held a bluish tint, though years of harsh living had dulled its natural luminescence. She stroked her daughter's ridged forehead, a gesture of comfort passed down through generations of a species now scattered across the galaxy. "The rain makes the collector's work better," Myra replied, her voice small but practical beyond her 9 cycles. "We'll have water tomorrow." Elia nodded, pride mingling with sorrow. No child should know so intimately the mechanics of survival, yet here they were, clanless, forgotten, surviving on the technological refuse of a dozen species who used Tarsus as nothing more than a dumping ground. Their exile had come 3 years prior when Elia's mate had died and their clan, facing resource scarcity, had made the brutal calculation that a widow and young child were expendable. The memory still burned, but Elia had transformed that pain into fierce determination. They would survive. They would prove their worth. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the patchwork of scavenged metal and synthetic materials that formed their home at the edge of Sector 7, a particularly rich vein of technological waste. Tomorrow they would hunt for usable components, power cells, circuit boards, anything that could be repaired and traded to the occasional junker ships that landed to scavenge the more valuable finds. "Tell me about the stars again," Myra murmured, already drifting towards sleep. Elia began the familiar story, tales of worlds beyond Tarsus, places where water fell clean from the sky and food grew from the ground. Places where Calasians lived in proper communities, with education centers and healing facilities. Places they would never see. The sudden roar shattered the moment, a sound so foreign to the quiet wasteland that both Calasians jolted upright, Myra clutching her mother in terror. "What is it?" she whispered. Elia's ears flattened against her skull. "A ship coming in too fast." They crept to the edge of their shelter, peering through gaps in the wall panels. Through the curtain of toxic rain, they witnessed a small vessel, sleek design, clearly built for speed rather than cargo, careening through the atmosphere. Flames licked its port side, and its trajectory was anything but controlled. "It's going to crash," Elia realized, calculations already running through her mind. A crash meant salvage. Salvage meant survival. But it also meant competition. The other scavengers would be racing toward it by morning. The ship disappeared behind a mountain of discarded freighter parts, and seconds later the ground trembled with impact. No explosion followed, a good sign. Whoever piloted the craft had managed some semblance of a landing. "Stay here," Elia instructed, reaching for her protective gear. A hodgepodge of salvaged items that offered minimal protection against Tarsus's caustic elements. "No," Myra said firmly, already pulling on her own makeshift mask. "We go together, always together." Elia hesitated, then nodded. The child was right. Separation was dangerous. They gathered their essential tools and slipped out into the acid rain. The journey took nearly an hour, navigating treacherous piles of twisted metal and occasionally sinking knee-deep into pools of industrial sludge. When they finally reached the crash site, the ship sat wedged between 2 mountains of debris, its elegant lines a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding it. It was human-made, that much was obvious from the design. Elia approached cautiously. Humans were unpredictable in her limited experience, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel, always confusing. The hatch had been forced open from within. A trail of blood, red, definitely human, led away from the ship and toward a relatively sheltered alcove formed by the careful collapse of shipping containers. Following it, they found him, a human male, unconscious but breathing, his dark skin glistening with rain and blood from a gash across his forehead. A portable medkit lay open beside him. He'd apparently treated himself before passing out. "Is he dead?" Myra whispered, her eyes wide. "No," Elia replied, kneeling to examine him. "Just hurt." "Should we take his things?" The question hung in the toxic air, the natural calculation of those who lived by scavenging. Yet something stayed Elia's hand as she gazed down at the unconscious human. His fingers were calloused, his clothing practical rather than ornate. An engineer, perhaps, someone who built things rather than destroyed them. No, Ilya decided, we'll help him. Myra's expression reflected surprise, then understanding. Because no one helped us. Ilya nodded, gathering the man's tools. Because that makes us different from them. Together, they fashioned a makeshift stretcher from debris and began the long journey back to their shelter, dragging the unconscious human through the rain as dawn slowly broke over the endless sea of technological waste they called home. The human stirred on the third day, his eyes, a striking amber color, opening to the unfamiliar ceiling of scavenged hull panels. Theo Kincaid's first instinct was to reach for his side arm, only to find it missing. Panic surged until he registered the small alien child watching him from a careful distance, curiosity evident in her luminous eyes. "Hello," he managed, his voice rough from disuse. The child skittered backward, disappearing through a gap in the wall. Moments later, an adult female of the same species appeared, Caucasian, Theo recognized from his interstellar travels. Tall, with bluish skin that seemed to hold an inner light despite its weathered appearance. "You're awake," she stated, offering a container of water. "Drink slowly." Theo complied, studying her as he sipped. "Thank you for helping me, I'm Theo." "Ilya," she replied simply. "The child is Myra." His ship's navigational failure had been catastrophic, forcing an emergency landing on this planet, Tarsus, if his calculations were correct. A scrap world, largely abandoned except for those with nowhere else to go. Looking around at the makeshift shelter, he understood immediately that these two fell into that category. "How long was I unconscious?" "3 rotations," Ilya answered, checking the crude bandage she'd applied to his head wound. "Your medical supplies helped. Human physiology is unfamiliar to me." As strength returned over the following days, Theo learned their story, their abandonment, their struggle for survival. He watched as they meticulously sorted through salvage, Myra's small hands remarkably skilled at identifying valuable components despite never having formal education. Each evening they returned to this shelter that barely deserved the name, a place where acid rain leaked through gaps, where temperature regulation was an improvised affair of warming panels that functioned at half capacity. On the 5th day, he was strong enough to visit his ship. "The propulsion system is damaged beyond my ability to repair here," he explained to Ilya as they stood in the shadow of his vessel. "I'll need to rebuild the plasma injectors, but I'll need parts." "We can help you find what you need," she offered, her voice careful, measured. "We know this sector better than anyone." Theo nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, already calculating, designing. That night, as they huddled in the shelter while a dust storm raged outside, he made his proposal. "Let me build you a proper home," he said suddenly, interrupting Myra's nightly ritual of cleaning salvaged components. "With the same materials you already have, just better designed." Ilya's expression betrayed nothing, but her eyes, those incredible luminescent eyes, narrowed slightly. "Why would you do this?" "Because I can," Theo answered simply, "and because no one should live like this if they don't have to." The next morning, he began drawing plans in the dust, explaining to an increasingly interested Myra how power could be rerouted, how hull fragments could be sealed against radiation, how filtration systems could be constructed from the very components they salvaged daily. Ilya watched from a distance, wariness gradually giving way to something else, a careful hope she hadn't permitted herself in years. By the 10th day, Theo had mapped out a structure, one that would use the natural protection of their current location, but expand upward and outward, creating actual rooms, actual systems. Myra followed him everywhere now, asking endless questions that Theo answered with patient detail. That evening, as Myra finally slept, Ilya approached him as he worked by the light of a salvaged power cell. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked, her voice low. "Humans always want something." Theo set down his tools, meeting her gaze directly. "I've spent my life building things for people who already have everything. Luxury ships, automated mansions on pleasure planets. This," he gestured to his plans, "this actually matters." Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier dissolving. Ilya sat beside him, close enough that he could sense the slightly higher body temperature that was characteristic of Caucasians. "Show me how to help," she said. And so it began, engineer and survivor working side by side, voices low in the darkness as they discussed load-bearing walls and power distribution. When Elia's hand briefly covered his while reaching for a tool, neither acknowledged the contact, nor the way it lingered seconds longer than necessary. Stirred on the third day, his eyes a striking amber color, owing to the unfamiliar seeing of sky and tall panels. The king's first instinct was to reach for his sidearm, only to find it missed. Hank surged until he registered the small alien shell watching him from a careful distance, curiosity evident in her. He managed his voice rough from it. Skittered backward, disappearing through a gap in the wall. Moments later, an adult female of the same species appeared, Clay, and Theo recognized from his interstellar trials, tall with blue skin that seemed to hold an inner light to its with. She stayed, offering a container of water. Drinks. Replied, studying her as he sipped. Thank you for helping me. She replied simply, the child is Mara. Navigational failure had been catastrophic, forcing an emergency landing on the planet Tarsus if his calculations were correct. Scrap world largely abandoned except for those with nowhere else to go. Looking around at the makeshift shelter, he understood immediately that these two fell in. Long was they in hunts? Elia heard checking the crew bandage she'd applied to his head wound. Your medical supplies helped. Human physiology is Turned over the following days, Theo learned their story, their abandonment, their struggle for survival. He watched as they meticulously sorted through salvage. Mara's small hands remarkably skilled at identifying valuable components despite never having formal ed. Achieving they returned to the shelter that barely deserved the name, place where rain leaked through gaps, where temperature regulating was an improvised affair of warming panels that functioned. Fifth day, he was strong enough to visit his system is damaged beyond my ability to repair here, he explained to E as they stood in the shadow of his valve. I'll need to rebuild the plasma injectors, but I'll help you find what you need, she offered, her voice careful measured. We know this sector better than it. But his mind was elsewhere, already calculating dying. That night, as they huddled in the shelter while a dust storm raged, he made it. Build you a proper home, he said suddenly, interrupting Myers' nightly ritual of cleaning salvage components. With the same materials you already have, just better. Expression betrayed nothing but her eyes, though incredible luminescent eyes narrowed slightly. Why would you? I can't, Theo answered simply, and because no one should live like this if they don't. Morning, he began drawing plans in the dust, explaining to an increasingly interested Myra how power could be ruined, how hull fragments could be sealed against radiation, how filtration systems could be constructed from the very components that. From a distance, awareness gradually giving way to something else, careful hope she hadn't permitted her. Theo had mapped out a structure, one that would use the natural protection of their current lane, but expand upward and outward, creating actual rooms, actual systems. Myra followed him everywhere now, asking endless questions that Theo answered with. As Myra finally slept, E approached him as he worked by the light of a salvage. You really doing this? She asked, her voice low. Humans always want. Down his tools, meeting her gaze directly. I've spent my life building things for people who already have everything. Luxury ships, automated mans on pleasure planets. This. He gestured to his plans. The act shifted between them in that moment, a barrier dawning. E sat beside him, close enough that he could sense the slightly higher body temperature that was characteristic of me. How to help, she had. Be an engineer and survivor work, said Bad, voice low in the dark as they discussed low-bearing walls and power distribution. When E's hand briefly covered his while reaching for a tool, neither acknowledged the contact, nor the way it lingered seconds longer than.